Ladies and gentlemen, strap in. It's Janek Gwizdala as the Janek Gwizdala podcast, and it has been a busy week, or maybe even 10 days at this point. And this episode has a little bit of kind of everything. As you heard, the pedal board is plugged in. It's the monster board I just built for gigs over the weekend here in Los Angeles. I will explain all, including signal path and the why and the where and the how. All of those things about the pedal board. We will get to that, explain the stereo setup. We're going to talk about 9/11. If you haven't read the latest episode, the latest copy, what do you call it? The latest newsletter, the latest post I put out on Substack. It's my free blog, a free newsletter. It's linked in the description of the video below. If you're not signed up, do so. It's completely free. And I tend to write about things I find interesting, and perhaps you may also. I wrote kind of an extensive post sharing the sheet music and sharing kind of a lot of behind the scenes details about this tune where I had to play 9/11. And we're going to get into it a little bit deeper today. So that's kind of a good warm-up to read if you are so inclined and have the time. It's all linked below. And we'll get into the physicality, the mechanics of what it took to play not only that song, but the entire gig that I'm going to talk a little bit about today. I'm, of course, talking about, if you haven't heard already or seen around the internet, sadly, Tony Levin got quite ill, quite sick shortly before a tour with his sort of co-led group Stickmen was about to start last week here on the west coast of the US. Stickmen is Marcus Reuter and Pat Mastelado and, of course, Tony Levin. And I had just finished up a tour with Steve Smith on the East Coast. And there's some crossover with personnel there, with Tony's guy and Steve's guy, and there's kind of booking and blah, blah, blah. So I guess I was sort of fresh in his mind because he'd just been out on the road with us, and he was kind enough to put my name forward for someone who might be able to fill in for Tony at the last minute and help out, trying to covering some of these shows. So we're going to talk about all of that, how it happened, what exactly happened. Long story long, I had a great time, and it was a massive challenge. So I got a lot out of it in terms of the music and in terms of what it did for my playing. And I'll get into all those details in this episode. There is so much to talk about. I'll share some things on screen, like the music, and I'll get into sort of how, maybe that's a good place to start when you're learning sort of very complex music in a short space of time. In fact, when you're learning any kind of music in a short space of time, I will say, I guarantee you in today's episode that I have some ideas for you. I have some pointers, some concepts that may help you do that. Whether you're learning a James Taylor song, which is verses and choruses and form-wise fairly simple, or whether you're learning something written by Tony and Stickman and Marcus and Pat, which is quite complex and very layered and rhythmically kind of dense and interesting. I think I got the call Monday or Tuesday, kind of tentatively, like, hey, are you available? This is last week, and probably got the full sort of list of songs maybe Tuesday night or Wednesday morning. Tuesday night, I think. And then, so that's Tuesday night, I get the list of songs, maybe 11 or 12 songs, I think, total. They put together a set that would work, potentially. And obviously, Tony Levin plays stick in that band. I do not play that instrument. So it was, first of all, was sort of shoehorning a different instrument into the lineup and trying to make that work. Marcus and Tony trade off playing melodies and bass lines, and they can both occupy pretty much any range, any part of the dynamic range. And then, of course, Pat has all of these tuned things and electronics and stuff that he plays and improvises with from the drums, that also can occupy a lot of different places in the mix of the band. So it's very fluid, I would say, in that sense, in that anyone can kind of take on any role. So stepping into that, I had to, be prepared for where I might play bass parts, where I might play melody parts. The tune we're going to talk about a little bit today as an example of that is a stickman tune called Cusp, where Marcus is playing all the bass part and the comping, and I was playing all the melody stuff. And I guess the first thing, there are no charts. There were no charts provided. It's a band, it's a band that I should really double check on this, and maybe if any of you guys are listening, Marcus or Pat or Tony, you can confirm or deny this. It would appear to me that it's a band where nobody has replaced Marcus or Tony in the past. It's a unit, and they sort of have grown together as a band, grown together compositionally in their process, especially from a harmonic standpoint. So I'm not sure too many things were ever notated or written down. And if they were, I don't think that notation or those notes were ever intended to be, read by a mercenary bass player like me coming in and trying to fill in for one of those guys. So I don't think the intention was ever to have like charts, sheet music for the band. So that didn't exist. I had to create that from scratch for all the tunes. So that was a bit of a challenge in itself. The transcription element, just learning all these tunes by listening to them. Every time something like this comes up, and obviously it doesn't come up on this level very often. This is quite it's a very unique situation where I'm filling in at the last minute, and it's for like an absolute like superhero of mine from the bass world, from the music, from music history. We're talking about Tony Levin here. He played on a lot of the soundtrack of my youth. Like how many thousands of times, although it's maybe the most well-known and maybe cliche to reference him with this song, but of course Sledgehammer, like how many thousands of times have I listened to that, both as a kid without knowing what was going on, and then as an adult just as a fan of Peter Gabriel and of the music. And I remember sitting in the media center at Berkeley checking out laser discs and VHS tapes of Peter Gabriel live with Tony, and the funk fingers and the fretless sound and the stick. Just all that stuff is such a big part of my history, as my education history as a bass player, how I learned to play. Tony's a big part of that, and we don't know each other really at all. We've met a couple of times. Not even sure Tony would remember. Of course I do, but it's not like we're best buds and it's like, hey man, can you just cover me for a couple of days? It's really sort of totally out of the blue in terms of that relationship. And so that makes it a unique situation. And to that end, I'm very grateful, and this is where I recommend to everyone listening who's trying to be a musician or trying to be a better musician of any kind, I'm always very grateful for the amount of work I've put in on ear training, on listening to music, on just the fundamental building block of what we do, being listening, one of the major ones anyway. And I'm always, every time something like this comes up and I can really pick up this stuff fairly rapidly, I'm reminded immediately when I'm like hacking through some melody, and I'll show you in a minute this melody in 9 that goes over the 11, when I'm going through that and it's not completely out of reach. I don't have this feeling of helplessness, like, oh my God, like I have to slow this down, I have to ask someone, I have to I can actually use my own ear, listen to the music, notate it. That's another a useful skill to have, I would say, is the ability to notate things, and notate things that are not in tab, which I think is one of the dumbest things ever invented when it comes to like actual music, when it comes to real world situations like this. I think tab is pretty dumb. So I always highly recommend, I don't know if I have a copy here. No, I think we're actually sold out, and I'm waiting for stock to come in. But of course, my book, Bass Player's Guide to Sight Reading, although the title of the book is Sight Reading and Learning to Read Music, actually a lot of the book is understanding what standard notation is for a bass player. So if you have questions about that, if you ever thought about, I do want to know like some basic, note placements and where those are on the bass clef stave, and how rhythms work, and dots and ties and repeat marks and the basics of notation, that's actually not a bad place to start. By the time this comes out, there will be signed physical copies in stock. There are always copies at Amazon, also digital copies available immediately. They're all linked below, so that might be worth checking out if you've ever been curious about notation, not just learning to read music, but also being able to notate it. Those skills that I picked up when I was pretty young, even some of them before I started playing the bass, I'm always pretty grateful for. So that process, that, you know, getting those tunes from Marcus kicked into gear, into high speed, into overdrive, actually, the process of listening, as much as I could. You know, I had to, because of the time, start putting pen to paper, so to speak, although I did it all digitally in Sibelius. I had to start putting pen to paper almost immediately. Ideally, in that situation, I would much prefer to have a few days to just listen to the music and soak up the form and the shape of each song and the feeling of each song and the range of each song and the placement and the sounds and all those things. Unfortunately, I didn't have that luxury. Literally got the songs Tuesday, had to transcribe them all and learn them all on Wednesday, because on Thursday we actually got a little rehearsal in for a couple of hours up in North Hollywood. I ran up there to meet Pat for the first time, to, you know, catch up with Marcus. I knew Marcus from before, and to just sort of bang through these tunes for a few hours before running back to pick up my daughter from school. So it's all a pretty accelerated timeline, far more so than what I'm used to in these kind of situations. And it just added to the challenge. That's not a complaint at all. This is just a debrief. This is just how it all happened, and kind of hopefully what I can leave you with today is how I was able to be efficient through this process, and specifically with cusp as well, because that really hung me up. I didn't think it was going to be that complicated. When you think about, the tune is in 11/4, essentially you could break that up into 6/5 or 5/6 or 4/4/3, or it depends, you know, about the composition, and we'll look at the bass line and see how that sort of denotes the sort of the chunks of 11, but it is essentially a big phrase in 11, and then there is this line which is a repeated 9-note phrase that goes over the top of it, and I thought, once I got the phrase down, let's actually just play that phrase. It's only been a few days, Wednesday, so we played 6 shows in 3 nights, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's Wednesday today. I've already played another show at the Baked Potato last night, super fun, so hopefully I can still remember this line. I'll take all the effects off, and we'll run down the effects actually, because the pedal board was key in being able to have a range of sounds where I could fill in the low end, but also sort of operate in Tony's stick, Chapman's stick range as well, with melodies and chords and all that kind of stuff. So on its own, in isolation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's not the most technically demanding thing to play. There's no position shift. It's on just a 2-string set. If I played it really slowly, I'm sure a lot of you could pick out the notes even. Can I play it slowly? That's the question. The articulation is a little more challenging at this pace, at this tempo, because that pull off right there is a little tougher to play. Anyway. Even if you can't pick out the exact notes right away by ear, I'm sure if you just listen to that over and over again, you could start to feel the rhythm. You could start to feel where the top of the phrase starts. You could feel some basic intervals, perhaps. Again, not that crazy on its own. You practice it, get it under the fingers. And okay, now, as you will see by the music that I'm putting up on the screen right now, that goes on for quite some time. It goes over kind of 1 2/3 bars of 11. So the challenge starts to come, or the challenge arrived for me where it was not that demanding, as you can hear, to play on its own, in isolation, where you can actually feel the 9, or you can feel three threes, or just there are so many ways to feel it when there's no meter running against it. Now, the next step in terms of, I was like, okay, this is exactly how it went down. I got the lick. I got it down and I was like, okay, cool. So let me just jam it along to the record. So I was listening to bootlegs on YouTube of Tony playing this. And that was the first sort of roadblock for me. It was like, oh, actually, yeah, when you're kind of trying to be aware of the form and where you are in the bar line and actually starting it on the downbeat and ending it on, I think, beat 8 or 9 or somewhere it ends in there, because then you go back to the top of the form to play the other melody, then things start to get a little more complicated, and I had to sort of put some systems in place to work on that. So the first one, let's see how, I wonder where I can put the metronome so you'll actually hear it a little bit. Maybe I can balance it on the bass like this. So suddenly, when you add a pulse, even an unaccented, ambiguous, just quarter note pulse, the downbeat of the phrase obviously changes. It moves. It's in 9. It's not going to fit perfectly on that grid of 4, 8, 16. It's going to shift all the time. So I had to start getting used to where the placement of that C was, the start of the phrase. Actually, I had to start getting used to where the placement of every note within that phrase was. I really wanted to feel comfortable, no matter which note of the 9 I was on, I could always still feel the pulse moving by, because I knew the next step was like, I've not only got to feel this pulse, I've got to feel it in 11. And then once we get to the bass line in a minute, which I never played, actually, I did learn it and I notated it, but Marcus played that on every tune. I never actually played it. I still had to be aware of that rhythmic pattern, which involved the bass and the drums were playing that together as well. There was that little hook at the end of each 11, and part of the melody grabbed that. So there were things I knew I had to be aware of while still playing. Playing this and then getting back to as far as I'm not reading it, I don't have the sheet music here, I don't have the digital up on my screen, so I'm just playing this from memory, but that sounds pretty accurate. So long story long, again, just the realization of it being, I guess, on the face of things, kind of a simple composition on some levels, because there aren't that many components to it. But once you layer those components, and of course, once you want to be musical with them, you want to be relaxed, you want to be loose, you want to be interactive. When you add in all of those elements, it suddenly bumps it up to a whole other level of complexity, which was far more of a challenge to get under my fingers and to get into the muscle memory, to the point where, most of the time I wasn't reading it in such a short space of time. So one of the things I did, which, because I was having trouble at that point, it's all very well now, I've learned it and I've played the shows and I have the music and I can sit here and talk about it fairly relaxed, and as you can hear, can still play it from memory. That obviously wasn't always the case. So my next step in terms of the odd phrase moving across the bar line, I actually immediately thought back to when we put out these Ultimate Chop Builder books, I think in 2018. And I remembered a specific exercise. Probably not going to be able to play this now, despite having the music right in front of me. But the concept, I just remembered the concept being like, oh yeah, this is what I need. I need something that moves across the bar line, maybe something a little simpler and inside, getting away from cusp, just to sort of reboot that part of my brain, the part of the brain that goes, oh yeah, you can do this. Like, have confidence in this, have confidence in yourself. You've done it before. You've written half a book on it. So it was just kind of good to remind myself that existed, and work on something in the same lane, but just a little more, a little simpler, just to reboot the brain a bit. So this was 7 instead of 9, and I'd be the first to admit that I'm definitely more comfortable playing a group of 7 than a group of 9. It's something I do far more often. Working on all this music highlighted some holes in my playing that I think, oh wow, could really improve some things here. So that was a great part of the challenge for sure, and something I will now continue to work on a lot actually. But grabbing this idea in 7. Now, if you have the Chop Builder series, this is in the Chop Builder Minor modes, the green book. There's a green one and a yellow one. They're actually bundled digitally right now. You could get both of these and get like 20% off. That's linked below. But if you already have the book, for instance, I know a lot of people listening will have this book already. I'm looking at exercise 10, the first iteration of it. It's A minor, and it's a melodic minor. So if I put... So just the actual exercise, because this is Chop Builder Minor modes, focuses on not only the phrase of 7 moving across the bar, but also moving through all the modes of the melodic minor. So playing that same 7-note phrase, but moving up each scale degree, in this case A melodic minor. So that would be see, which one is it by now? So you would move all the way through A melodic minor. Now, all I needed to do for the purpose of what I wanted was grab just the very first 7 and keep it static against this click, against the metronome, and just move 7 across the bar. Maybe I'll bring the metronome up to the... I don't need this book anymore. Let's put that out of the way. I'll bring the metronome up so you guys and girls can hear it a little better. This is so weird, balancing the metronome. So the whole feeling of the phrase changes as soon as you play it the second time, because where you play on the downbeat the first time, then you play the first note of the phrase on the upbeat the second time. This is pointless balancing this thing. I will run it just in case there is some residual click in the background. So I was really just trying to get comfortable with a phrase that starts on a downbeat, ends up the second time on an upbeat. And of course, that's in 7, so it's a little more complex when it gets to 9. It takes longer for it to resolve when it gets to 9. But just grabbing that one phrase, I always say, like, these books have very specific exercises in them. But there's so much, like, I can get so much more out of it. Like, that exercise was never intended to do this, but it absolutely does this, and it's literally what I used to get to this 9-note phrase in cusp. It was just a really kind of accelerated process in terms of the timeline, because I just didn't have any time. So here we are. That's what it was. My next step was then to get back to the 9, and I definitely felt a little more comfortable. I did that for maybe 20 minutes. That's all it kind of took to get comfortable with the 7 phrase from the Chop Builder book. And I did it in multiple tempos as well. So here I think my metronome was at about 88, 89. So I ran it up to about 110, 115 in sort of 5 BPM increments. And then I really sort of felt comfortable. I felt loose. It also felt like a bit of a warm-up, or it warmed me up more than I was already. Put me in the right frame of mind to really feel like I could nail cusp and to get a tricky element of the Stickmen set under my fingers. And I also think now that I'm remembering that I didn't know I had to play the melody on cusp until I got to the rehearsal. So I hadn't transcribed it, and I definitely hadn't learnt it until I got home after the rehearsal on Thursday. So we're talking about Thursday night into Friday morning, and the first show is Friday night. So that was sort of maybe one of the last pieces of the puzzle I put together in terms of melody. And then we played it, or I played it as a melody instrument for the first time on sound check before the gig, and it seemed to work out. It remained a challenge through the weekend, through these 6 shows that I play with them. You get in your head a little bit, I think. There's I always talk about the only things I think about when I play are repetition or change, and that is very, very true, especially when improvising. Have I been all over the place? Do I need to take an idea and repeat it more, bring some more focused narrative to the story? Or have I been repeating an idea way too much? Do I need to change it and give some variation to the storyline in terms of the improvisation, in terms of the solo, or whatever it is I'm doing? And that is very, very true. But then you sprinkle in a situation like this, and there are just so many factors that are impossible, I would imagine, for anyone to get away from. We haven't talked about the big one, and I guess for the pedal nerds out there, trust me, I am going to get to the pedal board and show you what I did and why I built it the way I did, and the sounds I got out of it specifically for this music. But before I do that, maybe a thing I hadn't really intended on talking about, but really I should in this episode, is the mental side of things, in terms of what I was actually thinking about and going through in the moment, because it wasn't just, can you do this gig and learn all this hard music and play these shows? There was a lot more going on there. Obviously, someone I greatly respect and admire was not feeling great and was not doing well. So that was, again, we don't have a personal relationship of any kind, but that's someone, one of your heroes, and you find out they're sick and they're not doing great. That's an added layer that I was definitely thinking about. I know Marcus and Pat as well. Of course, they're longtime friends. Can't even imagine how much tougher that was for them when they're that close. But yeah, from my seat over on the bass chair, that was definitely a factor. There were definitely things to think about in terms of knowing how loved and beloved Tony Levin is by the fans, in any situation he plays in, with Peter Gabriel, with King Crimson, with Stickmen, whatever the thing is, the Band of Brothers, the Tony Levin Band with his brother. I actually used to play with Pete Levin a little bit, Tony's brother. I mean, I haven't seen him in 25 years, and we only played together briefly in Kenwood Denard's band back in the late 90s. We did a few gigs. Me and Kenwood Denard and Pete Levin and Lionel Lueke. What a band. That was fun. He probably wouldn't remember either. But yeah, so I actually know or have known Tony's brother way more than Tony. I just remembered that. And where was I? I've totally lost my train of thought now. Yes, the things you think about. And that was definitely going through how loved he is by the fans and how much the fans expect to see Tony when they come out to a show that is... It's kind of his band in a way. Obviously it's not the Tony Levin band, but it's an equally co-led project, of which Tony is 33.3% of. That's a big percentage, and I know a lot of people were sad to see me sitting in that seat, and not Tony, for a multitude of reasons. So that was tough to get away from on a lot of levels. I'm not going to sit here and say that wasn't a consideration of mine. And I guess I now, on some level, know what a sea of disappointed Tony Levin fans look like. And at the same time, I met some really very nice people, very nice fans and audience members and people who came out to the show who had a lot of very positive things to say about our performance as a band. And that they were appreciative that the gig happened. I definitely wasn't a replacement for Tony on any level, in the way that band works. But I think the fans were appreciative that they got to hear the music of Stickmen in some form, at least in some capacity. So, lots of different, mental things, psychological things going on behind the music, so to speak, which audience members don't really know about, or maybe even think about, and a lot of musicians actually I don't think talk about that much either. And we got real. I don't know. I was going to say, did we get really lucky, or was it just a good gig? But somebody was out there reviewing the gig for Jazz Weekly, the very first set of the first night. Very positive response, and maybe that helped reassure the fans that were coming later on in the weekend that, hey, this gig is actually, pretty happening. It's like, it's going to be music. It's not going to be exactly the thing that you're expecting, but there is going to be good music and good interaction and improvisation, and as good a performances of these songs as we can possibly make with this time frame. And it's my first time meeting and playing with Pat, which was awesome. At the end of the day, it was like a real highlight of my year, a very unexpected highlight. And Marcus and I have known each other for a while and have talked or thought or whatever about playing together or doing something, and this was like a great opportunity to do that. So there was like so many positive things on so many levels. But yeah, definitely it's good to talk about the fact that when I'm sitting up there, or perhaps when you find yourself in a situation that could be anywhere resembling similar, just being in in uncharted waters for you, wherever that might be, on whatever style of music, whatever level of gig, with whichever band or group, it is totally natural to feel and think all those things. And for me, the best way of overcoming that and getting through it and having it not affect me in a bad way or get nervous or have anxiety or any of those things, was to remember that at the end of the day, I just love doing what I do. And yes, there were the music demanded very specific things from me. And we'll get to the pedal board in a minute, because that was a big part of the sounds. The music demanded very specific things from me. And also Pat and Marcus would make observations about this thing really needs to be here. And there was one night, there was this one B flat that I was playing in the lower octave, needed to be in the higher octave. And just it highlighted good musician, band member communication, and nobody with the big ego or I'm not getting my feelings hurt because somebody tells me that the B flat is in the wrong octave. I'm like, great, this is awesome feedback. I'll play the B flat up the octave next time. That's great. I think sometimes in those situations people can kind of like tiptoe around that, and I kind of like it when people get to the point and say, this could be better, and it could be better this way, and if we try that, I think it'll work. And boom, if you take that on board, you work with it, you make notes. Really important, make notes, write things down. Don't just go, I'll remember that, because inevitably the situation will get the better of you and you won't. So I'm always a big fan of making notes and just lots of communication. And it was every night. And it was like, I think there was even like Marcus gave me some note for the last set of the last, I don't 100% remember, but it was a good amount of feedback, and it was never too late. Like, it was never too late to be improving it. We didn't just play the first of 6 shows on Friday and be like, it's close enough, we'll just go with that. It was like, no, we can definitely make this better. And we did. I truly believe we did. I think Sunday night was the last set was probably better than the first set on Friday, and I think it got better through the weekend, and it got better quite quickly, and then it got different between each set, which was really fun. Then it became like far more interesting than it was stressful. It was like initially stressful to get through, like, we're going from 5 to 6 to 7, and this thing, and there's an extra bar of 5 there, but like all those little details, there were obviously like little mistakes in the notation that I had made here and there, so I was like correcting those as we went. And by the time Sunday came around, I was like almost off book, like doing most of it from memory and from feel, which felt really good. And then it became, like I said, far more interesting than it was stressful. And The other factor, which I had to get into, like morph into existence, was the sonic palette. There was just no way I could show up with a bass and plug it into the amp and just do the gig. It required some things. So we'll switch down to the overhead. You can see most of the pedal board here. Yeah, there were some things where I had a chorus, and I was playing kind of open sounding, you know, a little more open sounding for me with some tone rolled in. So there were moments like that. There were definitely some fuzzy moments. I actually got out the old Softtech Big Muff. Which I'll show you in a minute. Sounds amazing with certain things and not so great with others. So I did throw it in a parallel loop so I didn't lose all my low end. That was my solution for the Big Muff, because in series it wasn't as great on the gig as it felt in the in-ears at home in like a really controlled environment. So I got the FM back on the board for the first time in a while. For those of you who don't know that pedal, it's by Iron Ether, and it's basically an FM synth pedal. Let's actually close some of the tone down. Put a little bit of verb on there. So it has its own little flavor. I used the MXR, the Vintage Bass Octave, quite a bit. Sometimes like this, like with the OC2 setting for total sine wave domination. Sometimes with a little bit of Bit Crusher in there to give it some edge, some wave. Nothing really that new in terms of my sound there. I use that sound quite a lot with a little verb sometimes. Pretty standard for me, but this time around, I was also using it kind of a little bit more up the middle with some clean, not so much of the sub and some clean in there for definition. And let's add some things in. So I've got the Big Muff going there. I've got the Vintage Bass Octave into the Big Muff, into the Iron Ether Zero Graph Deluxe, which is a low pass filter. And I've got an expression pedal on that. That's how I'm getting some synth sounds. I know everyone is raving about the new MXR synth bass pedal. Ian Martin Allison sounded great from what I heard. If I can get my hands on one, I'm actually thinking about doing a whole, almost a mini documentary, like a really involved video on synth bass and kind of all of the options, and maybe shooting out the MXR synth bass pedal and the FM and then a setup like this with an octave of fuzz and a filter. That's generally kind of how it works in terms of synthesis for the bass. But yeah, that's for another video. Do an in-depth kind of deep dive on that. And then, of course, there was a lot of, Stickmen has a lot of improvisational layers to it. And there were, moments like on the set list, we played a tune. I think we played Red. We played some King Crimson stuff. I think first set was the first tune was Red. And then it just said on the set list, improv, 10 minutes, boom. So I went kind of, armed with some sound, some stuff I hadn't had on the board in a while. And we kind of got into some weird ambient stuff. Now, I also want to make another video on trails. If you're hip to trails, get in the comments and give me like a little running emoji. It's not a running trail, but it's the trails on time-based effects. And I love this Fabricat, Pladesk Electrics Fabricat so much. The sounds are incredible. But it's one of many unfortunate oversights on so many time-based effects pedals where they don't have trails. So you have this really beautiful granular, all these particles jumping off, right? In fact, I'll take the reverb out. So all you're hearing is the Fabricat. And you turn it off and it's all gone. There's no tailing off. There's no trail of the delay, of the grains, of the granular element of the pedal. So there are a certain, not everyone is into ambient music like this. So not every bass player is going to need that. But there are certain use cases for bass players where I think trails are actually really important. I want to make a video about that big time because I think that's useful information. But again, that's for another day. Underneath this big board, I just have the stereo DI coming out of the back and the JHS color box for the preamp up front. And yeah, just kind of made the kind of rockin', proggy, crimson-y, Tony Levin-y sounds between the octave pedal and the fuzz. And then I was able to play a lot of melodic stuff, for that tune Cusp. I was playing that like way, way, way up the octave. Oops. Playing in that kind of range. Sometimes I had the front a bit on to give it a little edge. And on the main melody, so that kind of sound, I actually can't remember off the top of my head how close that got to Tony's stick thing, because he's the one playing the melody on that. But I remember it being up in that register somewhere and having a little bit of grit to it. So I immediately went to the front a bit and the octave up with the harmonizer. And then one thing I really sort of fell in love with again was the sound of the big muff. With the harmonizer. Not sure Darn That Dream was ever meant to be played with a Mike Brecker sounding harmonizer with a fuzz on it, but what is crazy to me is how many people, everyone, like it's one of the most overproduced, overcopied things, right? The bass fuzz. Probably, I would go out on a limb and say it's probably the most made bass pedal in existence. Is that fair to say? I don't know. Get in the comments. Do you think the fuzz pedal in general is the most produced pedal in existence? Let me know about that. Talking to you, Hondo. I mean, as I look at my like vast sea of pedals here, there are so many fuzzes. It's kind of crazy. Some companies have 2 or 3, and I would guess that not only is the fuzz one of the most made pedals, but the Big Muff is like one of the most copied. Like that specific one, the green one, the old Sovtek Big Muff, the Russian-made ones from the 80s or 90s, whenever they were. I don't know. There's something about it that I can't get away from in terms of the sound, the way the note blooms naturally with that. I don't know what it is, and I've shot it out privately, not in a video. I don't want to shit all over a bunch of companies' gear because some of the pedals still sound great. It's just all the pedals that claim to clone that one are kind of missing something, just a little X factor, a little, I don't know, the intangible. I really don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it, and I think it's got something to do with the way the note blooms. Technically, in terms of the build of that pedal, I don't know what that would be. I'm not technically inclined in that department. I have no idea, but that's what it is as a feel thing, which is so important, and consequently as a sound thing, I think it sounds amazing when you get it dialed in right. I mean, this one's so old, the one that's on my board, I can't even remember which knob does which, so I would have to dial it a little better to get the optimal sound. But the Big Muff, the real one, the Sovtek one with the HX Stomp with the harmonizer, whoa, it's a very pleasing feeling and sound here in the room. As to whether that translates through the internet, through the tube, or Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you listen to this, I don't know. But that's it. Yeah, that's the board. It's really big. It's really heavy. It's really cumbersome. I don't think it's something I would tour with that much. I have the stereo, the Mood Stereo Mark II on there. I was using the HX1 for this 70s chorus. I had the looper, of course. That's about it. That's the whole thing. And again, signal chain wise, it's pretty straightforward. Even though, let's do that. Let's do the signal chain rundown to end the podcast. We'll switch over to the other camera and we'll go obviously in through the volume pedal out here. What you don't see right underneath the board is the preamp that goes into the color box. Then we're out to the vintage bass octave, to the Mantic Hulk, the subharmonic. We're into the F Emeron. So all of the octavey, subby kind of stuff is up front, basically. Those three kind of providing octave and synthy stuff up front. Then we've got the Franta bit. We've got kind of all the fuzzes, if you like, even though these are fuzzes, gated fuzzies, bit crushers, sample rate reducers, that they come next. So the Franta bit into the Bug Crusher, Frederick Effects Bug Crusher, into the parallel looper, the little Mosquito here, because that's controlling the Big Muff. But there we go. That's all fuzzes, distortions, whatever you want to call them. Then I'm into the filter. Then I'm into the Zero Graph Deluxe. Then I'm into the HX Stomp, which I was running in mono this time around, because I wanted the Fabricat. There's another sort of red X against the Fabricat that it's also mono. It's not stereo, which is a drag, because these sounds would sound ridiculous in stereo, just unbelievable. One of the best versions of that sound I've ever heard. Anyway, HX Stomp into the Fabricat. Into now is where we go to stereo. We go into the chorus. Well, the HX one that I was using for chorus, I got stereo chorus. We go stereo out into the Mood, which is stereo. We go stereo out into the Delver, which is also stereo, and then we go into the Ditto X2 stereo looper, which in turn goes to the Walrus Audio Canvas stereo. Jesus, there's so many names to remember these pedals. Goes into the stereo DI in the back. And that's it. That's the board. That's the lineup. That's the signal chain. Like I said, pretty cumbersome in terms of traveling. Marcus was using maybe 2 things plus expression pedal, volume pedal, the mini. I think he had a quad cortex and the chroma console, if I remember right, and a laptop, of course, for doing some looping stuff. And I believe the videos I think I saw Tony using a quad cortex also, although I seem to remember maybe a Kemper was being used before. I don't know. I've seen so many videos of so many people, I'm sort of losing track right now, but that's where I was at for this gig. And they asked me to do the rest of the run. I think it's like 19 or 20 dates on the West Coast. I couldn't do it because I'd just come back from being on tour with Steve Smith and Vital Information. So unfortunately, I was only able to help them out for the 3 nights here in Los Angeles because their tour happened to start here in LA. And I would maybe have tried to pare a few of these things down if I knew I was going to go on the road and do some flying with this thing, because it is big, it is heavy, it's a little cumbersome. So yeah, watch this space to see what happens next. I'm, as with every day, every week, I'm always learning something. I learned a ton on this gig, not just about playing bass, but about everything, about learning music, about anxiety, mental approach, subbing for a hero, just so many different elements. Of course, I wish Tony very speedy recovery, and I hope that is a situation that gets turned around very quickly. And Stickmen are out on tour now. Like as of this podcast, they probably play tomorrow, I think it is, the next show, and the rest of the month. I believe they have Reeves Gabrels from The Cure is joining them to complete out a trio and finish the tour. I believe that was the last I heard. But check out their website. Check out Stickmen. Is it stickmenband.com? Whatever it is, I'll link it in the description below. Go check out the tour dates. Go check out the band. It's a very interesting experience. I would imagine, actually, from the audience standpoint, I don't really have much experience of that. I've only seen them once a few years ago, and now my brain is completely full of being in the band momentarily. So I highly recommend going to check out a show and supporting them on this tour for the rest of this month on the West Coast of the US. That's it. Like I said, we got to so much stuff. Don't forget, Ultimate Chop Builder books are bundled below, digital ones. You can get these physical ones at Amazon, or you can get them from me and I'll sign them. That's all on the website. And like I said, that notation thing, if you're contemplating learning music quickly and notating it and having a very useful reference to take with you to the gig, notation is, in my opinion, definitely the way to go, especially with more complex music like this. And check out Bass Player's Guide to Sight Reading. That will help you on your way of understanding where all those notes sit on the stave and how rhythm works and how you notate that, and then of course how you read it back and get through a gig, perhaps like this one day. All right, that's it. Appreciate you spending some of your insanely precious time with me, hanging out, and I'll see you on the next one.